Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be comparing the Canon 24mm tilt shift lens against the relatively new Laowa 20mm shift lens from Venus Optics. Now, for a lot of architectural photographers, the 24mm focal length is kind of like the standard lens because it's a versatile lens. You can shoot interiors and exteriors incredibly well with this lens, so it's kind of like a standard. And in the last few years, Laowa has been producing, or Venus Optics I should say, has been producing lenses specifically for architectural photographers. They first produced the 15mm shift lens, their proper shift lens, not like an adapter, but they produced the 15mm shift lens, which I compared against the 17mm, and this time I thought I'd compare the 20mm to the 24mm from Canon, just to see how good this lens is. Do you need to spend the $1,900 for the Canon lens, or can you get away with spending considerably less at $1,100 for the Laowa 20mm shift lens? Aside from the price tag, the first thing that I noticed with the Laowa lens is the build quality. This is without a doubt one of the best constructed lenses I have ever used. This is like top tier construction, Zeiss level construction. It's incredible how well made this lens is. Everything is solid metal, has a fantastic weight to it. Even the lens hood is solid metal, and just the little touches, like the fact that the lens hood can be twisted around and it's got this little clicky sound when you twist it around. And you do need to move the lens hood around on this one, because if you don't, then it can be obstructed. It can obstruct the view when you're shooting, which I'll talk about later on in this video. The focus ring, incredibly smooth, and the aperture ring as well. It's just beautiful, beautiful construction. This is definitely better in terms of construction compared to the Canon lens, which feels a little less premium, which is strange because normally third-party lenses are the ones that feel less premium. However, Venus Optics has done an incredible job in terms of the construction of this lens. Obviously, that's not a comment on the durability of this lens or the longevity of the lens, because it's difficult to say, but what I can say is that construction-wise, the Laowa lens is definitely leagues ahead when it compares to the Canon lens. The other thing you'll notice is that this lens is completely manual. There are absolutely no electronic contacts in this whatsoever, and the aperture ring, everything is completely manual. So there's no aperture ring on the Canon lens. The only way to control the aperture ring on that is by controlling on the camera. However, the Laowa lens, the aperture is obviously on the barrel, and it's a physical aperture ring, and I like that. I really like that. It feels more tactile. That's not a benefit or a negative on either side. This is more of a personal preference. I just like the tactile feel of this lens. Tilt shift lenses, I mean, if you're shooting architecture, if you're shooting these types of things, that tactile feel is kind of part of the experience. So this lens in that regard is brilliant. Obviously, this is not a tilt shift lens. This is a shift lens only. So you only have the ability to shift the lens across the plane. You can't tilt the lens like you can with the Canon. But of course, for many architectural photographers, tilting the lens isn't something that you're probably going to be doing unless you want to control the plane of focus, but it's not a common thing that many architectural photographers do. So it may not be something that you're going to miss. But then again, it is a cheaper lens, and that might be a deciding factor for many people. However, I think for most people, the only thing that they're going to be concerned about is the quality, the image quality, the kind of results that it produces. And that's what we're going to be focusing on predominantly in this video. So we're going to hop into Lightroom. We're going to take a look at some of the pictures that are taken with this lens, and hopefully that can help you decide on which lens is going to be the best choice for you. So here we have the images opened up in Lightroom, and this first image that we're looking at shot with the Canon 24 tilt shift. The settings were exactly the same between this one and the Laowa, so all things are as fair as possible, daylight white balance, and obviously shot on a tripod as well. First thing I want to do is I'm just going to scroll back and forth between the Laowa and the Canon just to show you the difference in field of view. So although it's only 4mm in focal length, it's actually quite significant when it comes to the field of view, and you'll see how much more of the scene you can capture with the 20mm. And this is useful because sometimes you just want to shoot a little bit wider, or you want to have a little bit of extra breathing room. Let's say if you want to crop in post or fix the verticals, if you just want to make adjustments, obviously the Laowa can give you that extra bit of breathing space. But the counter argument can be made as well, where you've got the 24 and you can just zoom in without having to, or you can crop in without having to lose resolution. So longer focal length, wider focal length, I mean, there's plus and minuses on both sides. I just wanted to demonstrate the differences in field of view. Zooming in one-to-one with both images, we've got the Laowa on the left, Canon on the right. You might notice that the Canon is just ever so slightly sharper in the center. And if we just move across the frame to a little bit towards the left of center, you'll see how the brickwork on the Canon is just coming up a little bit more clearly in comparison to the Laowa. Now, obviously, the focal length advantage with the Canon is going to be there, but still, the Laowa is just a little less clear in comparison to the Canon. Even if we move to the edges of the frame, the Canon is actually sharper, which is odd because in the last Laowa Canon comparison, the Canon was actually quite a bit softer on the edges, but the Canon 24, it's one of those incredible lenses that Canon produced and it just does an excellent job. However, if you move towards the corner of the frame, that's when the Laowa is just that little bit sharper, and you can see how the Canon has a little bit of chromatic aberration coming in, and also it's just not as defined as the Laowa lens. But then the Laowa is also does have that little vignetting in the corner as well because of the lens hood. You can move the lens hood, but that's one of the a few things that I didn't like about the Laowa lens. You just have to constantly keep moving the lens hood around depending on what angle and where you're shooting. But still, the Canon lens is definitely sharper than the Laowa lens when it comes to crucial areas like the center and the edges of the frame. The other difference you'll see is that the colors. The Canon is a little bit more neutral in comparison to the Laowa. The Laowa just has that yellow shift, which was apparent in the 15mm as well. I think the coatings on the Laowa lens are just not as sophisticated as the ones on the Canon, and that's one of the key reasons why Canon lenses tend to be quite a bit more expensive. Coatings are one of the key reasons why these high-end lenses are expensive. And the Laowa lens has that yellow shift, which actually works for this particular scene, but for most types of architectural and commercial photography, I want a lens that is a little bit more neutral or closer to neutral. And Canon does a better job at keeping things just a little bit more neutral. It might look like it has a magenta shift in comparison to the Laowa, but that's only because the Laowa is leaning into the greens and the yellows much more than it should. The Canon is actually a little bit more neutral based on what the scene actually looked like. The second thing I want to look at is shooting panoramas with both lenses, just to show you how wide you can get with both lenses. So this is with the 24mm and this is with the 20mm. So you can see there's a big difference. You are getting quite a bit more in the frame with the 20mm, and I do like the look of the 20mm with that yellow shift. It kind of looks a little bit cinematic for this particular scene, so I'm actually enjoying that particular look. However, as I said, for anything commercial, any actual proper work, I do prefer to have a more neutral looking scene, and that way I can adjust things the way that I want to, as opposed to the lens applying a color shift or something to the scene. But anyway, the difference in field of view, you can see there is quite a big difference. You are going to get quite a bit more in the scene when you shoot with the 20mm compared to the 24mm from Canon. And also, I moved the lens hood. So if you notice, there's no vignetting. So the vignetting isn't a problem with the lens. Like, the lens does not have an issue. But the lens hood, if you haven't got it adjusted properly, then it can come into the frame, which I'm going to show you next. So if I just go to these two images over here, you can see how with the lens hood, it's just causing quite a hard vignette on the lens. And that's a bit of a problem. It's just a little bit of a pain. It's not a massive issue because, as I demonstrated earlier in the video, you can just twist the lens hood around, and once you twist it around, it's no longer in the frame. Doesn't cause any problems. The Canon, obviously, you don't get that issue at all. Even with the lens hood attached, you're never going to have that problem because the lens hood is different. It's not a leaf petal or a petal-shaped lens hood. It's a circular lens hood in comparison to the Laowa. But still, there is quite a difference when it comes to the field of view. Finally, I want to look at the flaring of both lenses, and this is, again, a bit of a problem with the Laowa lens because Laowa doesn't have the same kind of coatings that Canon does, and you can see how there's a significant amount of flaring which is coming through when you're shooting in direct sunlight. With the Canon, you don't get that. You've got this like tiny little speck of a flare over here. The internal reflections and the flaring is managed so well by the Canon lens. If you're shooting in brighter conditions, you're just not going to get a problem with that. With the Laowa, however, the 20mm, the 15mm, virtually all of the lenses that I've shot with from Venus Optics, they have this issue where the flaring can be pretty bad. And for architecture, this is not a good thing. This does not work. And in terms of like creative applications, I can't imagine many situations where this kind of flaring is going to be a good thing. Because for commercial work, architecture, you don't want the flaring. You want a seamless, beautiful looking photo. And Canon is going to give you that much more effectively than Laowa is when you're shooting in brighter conditions. Also, the T-stop might be a little bit different in comparison, because even with the same settings, because if we're shooting at f8 on both lenses, you'll see how the Laowa is just about half a stop darker than the Canons. And this is just something I noticed when I was shooting around. The Canon was just a little bit dark. Sorry, the Laowa was just a little bit darker in comparison to the Canon, regardless of what settings I was shooting at. So it's about half a stop in terms of the T-stop. I think a lot of the light, or some of that light, is getting absorbed in the lens or just going astray. And it's the coatings. It's just not quite as good as the Canon. But overall, the Laowa lens is a exceptionally useful lens because of that difference in focal length. Yes, it does have a few issues when it comes to flaring, and the lens hood, a little bit frustrating, but it's not a deal breaker by any means. However, the results that it produces are stunning. And I know that it might be slightly less sharp in comparison to the Canon, but that's honestly such a minor issue that I don't really consider that as a big problem, because there are so many different ways of sharpening in post that this is not an issue. This is a fantastic amount of detail, and I'd be happy with that regardless of what I'm shooting. So yeah, quite impressed with the 20mm Canon 24, still just slightly better, but obviously the price is significant in comparison to it. So there you have it. That's how the Laowa lens compares against the Canon, and honestly I'm so impressed with what Venus Optics has done with their 20mm shift lens. Construction, usability, image quality, it is a fantastic option. A few minor issues when it comes to the lens flaring and how well that's controlled, but honestly it's not a major problem in the grand scheme of things, especially depending on how you shoot and your personal preferences. Personally, I would still lean a little bit towards the 24mm tilt shift, and the reason for that is because I do like to shoot in harsher lighting scenarios. So on that basis, I would lean a little bit towards that if you have the budget for it. If not, then obviously go towards the 20mm. They're both incredible lenses. Having said that, I don't think this is an either or situation. And the reason I say that is because when you're shooting with the 24mm, going from 24 to 17 is a big jump. That's a big jump in terms of how wide you're shooting. And sometimes, I say sometimes, in a lot of situations, in my experience, I find that I just want to shoot a little bit wider. I don't want to jump from 24 to 17. I just want to shoot a little bit wider, and the 20mm lens fills that gap perfectly. I think Laowa has done a brilliant job at differentiating itself enough that it's not a direct competitor to the 24mm from Canon. It sits in its own little category, and on that basis, if you already own the 17 and the 24, probably a good idea to buy the 20mm from Laowa as well, because as I mentioned, going from 24 to 17, big jump. And also you have other issues like you can't use the same filter system, the big bulbous element, it picks up reflections from everywhere. It's just a bit of a pain shooting with a 17mm relative to shooting with a 20mm or the 24mm. So yeah, I think this is a brilliant option whether you own the 24mm or not. And if you do own the 24mm, probably a good idea to buy the 20mm, because you will inevitably come across many scenarios or many situations where you just need to shoot that little bit wider, and the 20mm might just make all the difference for you. Anyway, just want to say thank you so much for watching my video. If you like this video, hit the like button, subscribe, share this video, and I hope to see you all in the next one. Thank you.